Okay, so welcome to another CAD tutorial here. This one we're going to create this pyramid bracket. That's what I'm calling it. I can't say that that's necessarily the actual name of it. But the cool thing about this video is we're going to use a new program that I haven't created a video for before. This program is called OnShape. So let me move this out of the way. This is the program here if you're not familiar with it. If you have an educational email or if you request an educational account, you can get a free account to OnShape, and I'm really impressed by this program. We've learned this program to help our students during remote learning continue with their CAD education. But this is a really cool program. It's owned by the folks who own Creo, so PTC. We're going to create this bracket in here. I'll show you how to do it. This is just my trial run on it. But we'll create a new one. So basically, once you're in OnShape, it's fairly simple. The cool thing about this program is that you create documents that have parts, assemblies, all sorts of things. You can create sub-assemblies, all sorts of stuff like this, all in one document. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a document. And for this document, what I've asked my students to name it is MS1004, because that's the title of our project. And we're going to create this document here. It'll load our workspace. And then once it loads the workspace, you can see we have datum planes just like any other CAD program. If you've watched my videos before, we're going to start with a part. We're not going to use an assembly. So what I'm actually going to do is right click this and delete the assembly entirely. We can always create that later on. So for my part, I am going to right click it and rename it, because what I've asked my students to name this one is pyramid bracket. Okay, and I'm going to hit enter. All right, so to create my pyramid bracket, there's a couple things I want to consider. So I'm going to bring this part back. A couple things that I'm telling my students, they're required to watch this video in order to learn some of these things. But this is out of a drafting book, and this here is indicating this is the front view. Well, I don't disagree with that. What we have to keep in mind is when we model something, we want to, A, as I always talk about in my videos, model it based on how someone's going to make it. B, we want to minimize features where we can. And C, I want to think about how it works within an assembly. Now, I haven't provided an assembly for my students, but what I'm going to ask them to consider is that there is a piece that assembles to the bottom from down here up in this direction, and then another piece that assembles to the back side here in this direction. Okay, so that means that those two surfaces are very important for our drawing and orientations for our drawing. That also gives you an idea of how we should maybe dimension some of these different features. Okay, but we'll get to that as we start going through it. So OnShape works the same as any parametric modeling program you may be familiar with. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, one thing that's a little bit different, I talk about this a lot in videos, is how you should create your sketches inside of features. Okay, but the way that OnShape works, the sketching is done a little bit differently. So you can actually create like a full view and just select certain edges that you want to extrude or revolve or whatever it might be. I try and focus on doing it pretty traditionally, but in some of my future videos, I may create some with the way that OnShape sort of pushes you towards or allows you to do. But it's important in this one to understand I usually try and focus on the way that is going to work in all CAD parametric modeling programs. Okay, so you're unable to create an extrude and then start sketching. So what we're going to do first is create a sketch first. And as you hover over these, you'll see different shortcuts for each of these. So extrude, for example, Shift E, sketch is Shift S. So I'm going to hit Shift S or click this to start a sketch. Just like anything else, it's going to ask me for my sketch plane. I'm going to draw it on this front plane here. and then I'm going to hold right click and say view normal to sketch plane so that I'm looking right at it. Okay, and now I need to create my general sketch. Now if I'm looking at this piece, my front plane, just because I'm kind of planning the way my drawing is going to look, what's my primary view? The most descriptive view, the one that's clearest about the shape of this object, is definitely the one that's indicated as the front here, looking from this direction. So I agree with that. But if I'm going to create this front view, the way someone would make this is they would create sort of the whole outside of this, okay, and then cut away this piece here, okay? Or they might make it from an angle bracket. There's no indication here that this is made off of an angle bracket. Now, one other thing that you may notice is that all of this is in metric, okay? That's very important, okay? Our units certainly are very, very important. It'd be a pretty large piece if that was in inches. So actually, I even went a little bit too far here. We're gonna cancel out of this, all right? And then we're gonna go up to here to our little 3 bars, and we're gonna change our workspace units. So our workspace units are not gonna be in inch, they're going to be in millimeter, okay? And usually with millimeter, I usually like to change it to 2 places. The 3-place decimal on millimeter or metric dimensions is pretty accurate there. 2 places is plenty enough. We're getting within thousandths of an inch just by doing that. So we'll go to 2 places as well, and then we'll hit OK, and then I'll go back to that sketch. So now I'm going to draw on that front view. I'm already looking directly at it, so I'm going to say I'm ready to go here. So now I'm going to come up to my circle, and I'm going to hover over this one. You can see it may be a little hard to see. There's some dashed orange lines in the background to let me know that I'm in line. I can always add constraints later if I'm off this line, but I like to save time where I can. So you can see there's a vertical constraint previewing there. That's what that little vertical line that you see to the right of my cursor is. I'm going to click, okay, and then I'm going to click. I'll edit this later after I have the full sketch here. And then from there, I'm going to click on my circle with a line. So I'm going to pick the line command up here. And then I'm going to click on my circle here. And I'm going to move downward like this. And then click. And then straight down, click. All the way over, click. Vertical line again, click. And then I'm going to come over to the circle, and if I want to save a little bit of time, I can even move until it gives me that little tangent icon if I wanted. It's not mandatory that you do that. I like to save constraints where I can, so I'm going to go ahead and click there as well. Now I can hit escape, and now I need to add some constraints, because if you've watched any of my other videos, the first thing I always talk about after we create a sketch is before you start dimensioning things or whatever, minimize your dimensions where you can with some constraints. So this side over here is already tangent. I'm going to make the other side tangent as well. Okay. Now the other things I'm going to do is I'm going to say that I could either say these 2 lines are equal, or I could say the points are horizontal. They both do the exact same thing. Okay. So I'm just going to say they're both equal. Okay. And then the last thing I'm going to do is start going through and putting in some of my different dimensions. But actually, one thing that might change some things is if this was maybe equal or at a different angle, but we'll see what happens. We may need some more constraints, we may not. Okay, right now it looks pretty symmetric. You may be wondering, why aren't I just mirroring the 2 sides? I like mirror constraints, I like symmetric constraints. The downside of that is that sometimes, you can see there's a symmetric right up here, sometimes you don't realize it, but that actually eliminates some dimensions for you. So we're just going to dimension it, and then we'll see what we're missing. Okay, so I'm going to go up here. I can just hit D, or I could click that. I'm going to hit D, and then I'm going to first put the width in. Okay, my width, well, I'll just put my dimension right away. So my width was 96. That's going to shrink things down. Okay, I'm going to put a radius in up here by just clicking this and pulling that out. That's giving me a diameter right now because I have a full circle. So actually what I'll do, I'll hit escape, and I'll go up to my little trim command, my little scissors, and then I'm going to pick this to get rid of it. And now when I go to this, it's going to give me a radius because it understands the basic rules of drawings. If I have 180 degrees of an arc or more, it's going to give me a diameter. If I have less than 180 degrees, which I certainly have less right now, I don't have half a circle, it's going to give me a radius, which is the correct way to do it. Again, this is a really good program. Okay, they understand a lot of really good rules. You'll see that when we start doing the drawings as well. All right, so I'm going to click. My radius was 17. Then I'm going to hit enter. And now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a control for how tall it is for this little area here. So I'm going to click that line. I'm going to move out. I'm going to click again. The height of that is 12. And I'm going to hit enter. And then I also need a height to the center of my circle. Okay, now from the center to here, according to my drawing, is 15. Okay, however, if you remember from the beginning, what I said was there was a piece that assembles to the bottom. So if I want to make sure that whatever assembles to here is in the correct place for how these two pieces may operate together, I really need to do some math and actually dimension this from the bottom. So if I take 15 and 12, that gives us 27. And now I can come back over here and go dimension from there down to the bottom, move out, click, 27. Okay, and what am I missing? Okay, so I have a dimension to the center of this. I have a height here. I have a width here. Okay, so now I need to think about a few things. Okay, so for example, these two are supposed to be equal. Let's make sure that that's the case. It appears it is. Okay, so what I then need to do is start thinking about some of my other things. So this should be equal, these two lines. And as soon as I put that in, look at that, this thing lines right up. Okay, so really what was happening is these two looked very close to the same, but in reality these lines were just shifted over a little bit, so they were at slightly different angles. Okay, but this is a perfectly symmetric piece, so once I add that constraint, the entire thing turns black, and now I know that my part is fully defined. Okay, now with some other programs it's a little more obvious. So for example, if you're using Creo, which is owned by PTC as well, Creo would have some preview dimensions that say maybe you need this dimension, okay, or add more constraints. This one, it requires a little bit more skill, but you know, it's a free program, so you really can't complain. So now we're gonna hit OK to finish my sketch. Okay, now there's a couple ways we can manipulate this part here. Okay, so I could either select my sketch and then click extrude, or I could click extrude and then select my sketch. It does the exact same thing. Okay, so I'm going to go into the extrude and it's going to say, well, what do you want to extrude? Okay, and I'm going to pick this sketch right here, and you can see now it's previewing my extrude. Now the distance I'm extruding, I'm okay with it coming forward. This is not a symmetrical piece across that front plane, so I'm going to leave it the way it is. So I'm going to type 36, I'm going to hit enter, and you can see there's my extrusion right there. And now I'm going to hit the checkbox. Okay, now the next thing I need to do is I need to make a cutout here in order to create that sort of L-shaped piece that I had before. So this time I'm going to go sketch, I'm going to click on this right plane, and I'm going to right click view normal to sketch plane. All right, now again, this is a little bit different because the only thing that it recognizes in OnShape is initially the datum planes. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll just add some constraints. It's not a big deal. So I'm going to click with my rectangle command. I'm going to go down to the right, and I'm going to click again. Now I'm going to go over to my my coincident constraint, and I'm going to click on the top line, and I'm going to try, if I can get it, to get this top point. I may have to rotate in order to get this top point to pop up. Tangent edges tend to be something it doesn't recognize, but I'm sure in the future that would be something it would adjust. So then I can, if I want to, I could just keep working in 3D. I don't mind doing that. So I could say, okay, this line lines up with this front surface, and this line lines up with this edge. Okay. Now the last thing I have here is this line is way out of whack. Okay, so I could hit escape, If I want, I can drag it over. I think I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to hold right click again. Not let me this time. But I'm going to rotate this and just make sure that it's a little spaced away. And then I'm going to add another dimension in, okay? So I'm going to hit D, or I could come up and click the dimension, keep in mind. I'm going to click this line. I'm going to rotate. I'm going to try to pick this back point. Okay, and then I'm going to click. And the depth there is 10. I'm going to hit enter. Okay, and that defines this entire thing. So now I can go back over to that extrude. And what I'm going to do this time is, instead of an add extrude, I'm going to remove. Okay, and I'm going to go through all. All right, and I can add a second position that is going to go through all as well. I like to create things in the center. You could have technically created on this side, just extruded it in one direction. Would have done the same thing. Okay, but symmetric pieces, I don't know. I like to go from the middle personally, personal preference thing. So now I'm going to hit OK. Okay, and now we're getting somewhere. We're getting pretty close to this piece. All right. Now the next thing I want to do is, if I look at my part and I'm keeping in mind what do I think is important here. This slot right here, just from design experience, I'm going to assume probably lines up with something that's very accurate, maybe like a dowel hole, something like that. This one up here, this gives you your adjustment. That's why it would be a slot. And then this one here is probably very accurate to whatever assembles to the backside. These holes, I wouldn't want to base these other things off the holes. That's why you see it based off the center, because I can see just by this dimension that these are clearance holes. All right, that means there's going to be some space there. I don't want to rely on those to make everything else accurate, because they're not going to be super accurate. Okay, whereas this slot is going to be very accurate. All right, so now I'm going to move that back over, and we're going to create that slot first. Okay, so I'm going to create a sketch, and I could create it on the bottom or the top surface. I'm going to create it on the top. All right, I'm going to right click. I'm going to view normal to the sketch plane, and then I'm going to start creating my piece. Okay, so my circle first is going to line up with the center. About that big, looks pretty good. I'm going to take a line, and whenever I'm creating stuff like this, a lot of times there's two different ways you can approach it. So you can either focus on creating a perfectly perpendicular line, or you could focus on creating like a tangent line. All right, it's going to end up being that way either way. So what I'm going to do is just go straight down, click, over, click, and now I'm going to come up to here and try and get that tangent to pop up, and then click. So now I've got to add what's missing on each side. So the right side needs to be vertical. Okay, I do that with the vertical constraint. The left side needs to be tangent. Click that, and now that's tangent. Then I need to do some trimming. I'm going to trim that little arc away, and now I can start putting my dimensions in. All right, so I'm going to hit D, and I'm going to put a few things in. Usually with a slot, you want to indicate how much play you have in it, you know, the full width. So I'm going to go from that point to here. I'm going to go outward like this, and that distance is 15. And then there's a couple ways you can measure slots. You could put a radius or a diameter in here, or we could put a full width. Okay, now personally I like to put the full width. It helps me down the road to kind of tolerance if we were going to do that. This is going to be a simple part, but if I was going to tolerance it, I would want to tolerance it across here as opposed to tolerancing just half with the radius. So we're going to go dimension from this line to this line, come down here, click. 14 is the width, and I'm going to hit enter. All right, and then I'm going to hit my checkbox. All right, now I'm going to take this sketch, I'm going to extrude it again. I'm going to remove this time again. And I'm going to do through all. You don't want to just do a blind just because it cuts through. You want to do through all. If it goes through everything, then say it goes through everything. All right, now I'm going to hit my checkbox. There's my cutout. Now all I have left is 3 holes. Okay, now I will tell you one thing in OnShape that is a little tricky is how they do holes. I don't love it necessarily, but It's okay. It's not the end of the world. All right, so I'm gonna hit sketch. I'm gonna click this top surface. I'm gonna right click, view normal to sketch plane. Now the way the hole tool works is I need to put points, okay? Now we can see this one up here is just a straight 12 millimeter hole. This one over here is a 7.2 hole with a counter bore of a certain depth. So I know I need a hole tool for here, but if you've watched my other videos, you know I always drive home the point that you should use the hole tool anytime you put a hole in. Don't use extrudes to make holes, okay? Down the road, you're just making life much more difficult for someone who has to maybe change the design. Okay, so I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to pick that point tool. That's how they indicate where the holes are. I'm going to click, and I'm going to click, and then I'm going to put some constraints in. So these holes are horizontal from each other. Okay, they're on a horizontal plane across. All right, and then the other thing that matters to me is where they are in relation to the center. Okay, so I'm going to go from here to here. That one's going to be 36. The other one's also 36 away, okay? But before I put that one in, let's put a dimension where they are from the end of the part. Now, the way that they indicate where this thing is, I don't necessarily agree with it, okay? If this is indicating where the part is, I should probably measure it off of here, but I'm gonna do it the way they did it just to be consistent. So from here to here is 12. Okay, and this one isn't indicated where it is width-wise yet. What I like to do is do a half from one side, and then if I was going to do GD&T, it would be better off if I did a full width here of 72. We're not going to do GD&T, but you know, it would work if I did the 36 as well. It's just a little cleaner. All right, so I'm going to say okay, and I'm going to pick this sketch, and now I'm going to come up to the hole tool. And you'll see why I did it this way, okay? So it recognizes right where those points are. I could have put them all over the place. It would have created a hole at every point. But what I'm gonna say is it's a counter bore hole, okay? And as I start going through this, you're gonna see some big adjustments, okay? So the diameter of my main hole that goes through is 7.2. And then my counter bore is 10, and my counter bore has a depth of 5, and the hole itself, the main hole, goes through. So you can see, look at that, I have this entire hole done just because I used the hole tool. So I'm going to hit the checkbox again. Now we're going to do the same thing for this one up here, and then we'll be done with the part. So I'm going to go sketch on this surface, right click, view normal to the sketch plane. Now this could be a little tricky. What I would recommend you do is hover over this, create a circle to that tangent point, then say that that circle is equal, and then select that circle by hitting escape, pick the circle, turn it into a construction circle. That's going to give you that center point, okay? So now I can take a point and I can put it right in the center there. There's my point, okay? And the advantage of this is now as if I change this radius, this circle will move as well, okay? So I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to pick that sketch. I'm going to create a new hole. This one's not going to be a counter bore. It's going to be a simple hole of 12 millimeters, and it's going to go through. Then I'm going to hit my checkbox, and now I have the full part. And then if you want to, you can hover over each of these, turn your planes off if you want to see what your part looks like. Make sure it's right. And then you can also go to this little drop down here, hit isometric. There's my part, and I can see that it is exactly what I want it to be. A little different orientation, but it'll help me when I get to the drawing. So with the next video, I'll create a drawing of this part and show you how to do the drawing package of OnShape as well.